All right, everybody, welcome back to another conversation on the Break podcast on Career Cloud Radio. I'm your host, Michael Gardon. I talk a lot about breaking work and building a resilient career that adapts to the flow of change that inevitably happens. I can't tell you how many times I've coached a person who just got laid off and says, I wish my network was bigger and better than it is right now. Ladies and gentlemen, continuously building quality relationships is a resilience skill. Having relationships at the drop of a dime help you find new opportunities, partnerships, and support in good times and yes, especially in bad times. Everyone needs relational skills to lead people more effectively or expand network of opportunity and influence. But cultivating those skills into relational intelligence that serves you and others can be very difficult. Here to dive into how we can develop relational intelligence is Dr. Adam Bandelli. Founder and managing director of Bandelli Associates, Dr. Adam C. Bandelli is an organizational psychologist and seasoned leadership advisor with over 20 years of corporate consulting experience. Adam's calling and purpose in life is to help leaders identify, embrace, and unleash their true, authentic selves. In his latest book, Relational Intelligence, he details 5 essential skills that he has found to create life-changing relationships. Adam received his Ph.D. and master's degree from the University of South Florida in industrial organizational psychology. Now he runs Bandelli Associates, where he and his consultants leverage psychological insights to help their clients unleash their true leadership potential. Prior to founding his current agency, Adam was a partner with Korn Ferry, where he coached C-suite executives. He has been featured in Chief Executive Magazine, Success Magazine, Fast Company, and HR.com, and more. He hopes that through his work and book, he can help eradicate the stigma that people have with mental health disorders and damaged or broken, and to change the stereotypes that are associated with people who have bipolar disorder. In this episode, Adam and I discuss the mystique around this topic of organizational psychology, how the origins of Adam's obsession with leadership and relationships was born in athletics, and specifically the 90s NBA with Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird. We talk about Adam's battle with mental health disorder and how that has shaped his view of relationships and leadership. We dig into why relationships are so key to leadership. And we also touch in detail through the 5 skills to build relational intelligence that he maps out in his book. There's loads more in this episode, so stay tuned all the way to the end for the rapid fire questions. And if you're a sneakerhead, make sure to flip over to Career Cloud YouTube channel and see Adam's sneaker collection on the wall behind him. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did with Dr. Adam Bandelli. This episode of the Break podcast is brought to you by the Supercharge Your Career free virtual event at careerhackers.com. Sign up for 2 days of action-packed events with amazing speakers for job seekers and career builders. And I'll see you there. And it's also brought to you by the Expand Conference 2022, featuring yours truly as a keynote speaker. This conference is put on by my friend Tarika Wheeler and is packed with amazing speakers, other than me, of course. The focus this year is on leveraging the power of focus. And I will be specifically discussing how to use investing principles to break your career. It's November 18th. And I hope to see you there. Adam, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure. How are you?
Doing great. Happy Friday. I'm excited to talk about relationships, relationship building today, because with our audience, as I mentioned to you before we kicked off here, I talk a lot about the idea of networking and building relationships as a leverageable skill, because you are able to leverage people and connections for a whole host of things, upside gains, new jobs, partnerships, and getting human capital to build your business as well. So I'm really excited to dig into that topic. I want to start off a little bit with your background.
Yeah.
So you are an organizational psychologist and you have a Ph.D. I must say one of the only classes for my graduate studies that I remember is my organizational psychology class, my behavioral psychology class. And so I want to ask, first, can you kind of tell us exactly what organizational psychology is for people who don't understand that? And then the second part is I'm wondering what experiences you had that drew you into that field, because it's fascinating, but I feel like it's also not well defined for people.
Yeah, that's so good. So first part, organizational psychology is a division of kind of the broader psychology world where we really focus on taking psychological principles like goal setting, motivation, teamwork, things that you would do elsewhere, sports or other industries, and apply it to the business world. So organizational psychologists can do things like be management consultants and come into companies like we do and help leaders develop and grow. They can go into HR functions and do talent management, talent acquisition, and those type of things. So a lot of different opportunities for organizational psychologists to have an impact on different parts of the business world. For my own journey, for your audience who can see the video behind me, the shoes. So I am a athlete first before anything else in my life. And I played basketball, high school and college, was point guard. And so for me, I've always been fascinated about one question, really, what makes great leaders great? And so growing up in the 80s, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, that was really kind of, what differentiated not just the athletes who were phenomenal in terms of the raw gifts and abilities that they had, but how did they rally people around the cause? How did they motivate? How did they inspire? Kobe Bryant's another great one. I've seen, they just had a documentary come out on Netflix about the Redeem team in 2008.
Right.
The whole Kobe played on that. So just that kind of got me thinking about, okay, what makes a great leader? And when I got to college and realized I wasn't going to be like Mike and go to the MBA, I had to come up with a plan B, and was always fascinated by psychology. I think like most people, I wanted to help people, but I didn't know what that meant. And I took a industrial psychology class, which is very similar to org psych, my freshman year. And the professor walked in the room with a 3-piece suit and a Rolex. And I said, okay, wow, what does this guy do? All my other professors are wearing hoodie flannels. And he started talking about leadership and management consulting and how to make teams more effective and organizational development, stuff that I was fascinated by. And so this is around the time I started this habit. I do it now all the time. At the end of the semester, I just wrote him a letter, generally saying, thank you for the class. And if there were any other opportunities to learn. And he invited me 2 months later to see him give a talk at the American Psychological Association. They have an annual conference, and this one was going to be in New York City. This is in the mid 90s. And he was speaking about a topic that I never heard of before called emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I was exposed to what EQ is. It was right around the time Daniel Goleman came out with his famous book, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Matters More Than IQ. And that started me on the journey, which ultimately led me to doing my doctoral dissertation on relational intelligence. And it's been the focal point of my practice the last 20 years.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. I feel like the field doesn't get enough coverage. And I think it definitely, with emotional intelligence kind of coming to be more of an accepted genre, or I guess, it's getting more, but the idea that it makes sense. I mean, companies and organizations are made up of people, and people have psychology, right? And so the idea that we can figure out how to motivate and help people in a better way to achieve greater impact, it is a fascinating one. And I think the sports connection is just so true. I think you definitely, like as a kid, at least, I remember learning more about psychology through sport than anything else that I did. So that's amazing. So as part of your journey and your drive of what you do, I think, reading up on you, one of the driving forces behind what you do is really kind of quote, he hopes that through his work and book, he can help eradicate the stigma of people with mental health disorders and damage or broken and change the stereotype that associated with people who have bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
Why is mental health so important to you?
Yeah. So I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 22. I was in my second year of my doctoral program. And for me, up until that point, especially as an athlete, you have a bad day or you get some, sad feelings, you kind of just brush it off your shoulder and keep going. And for the first time in my life, I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't shave. Just some of the basic things that people start to lose when they get into a depressive episode or they start to have depressive symptoms. So it was scary, very scary. I didn't know what was going on. Went on for about 3 or 4 months. I went to a therapist for the first time. And again, at the time, I think like most men in their early to mid 20s, you think you're unstoppable, you think you're Superman. So the idea of going to a therapist was, showing vulnerability and being weak. And 3 or 4 months later, I entered into a manic phase where I was spending excessively, drinking excessively, all the extreme ends of bipolar when you're in a manic episode. And then 2 months later, I was depressed again and suicidal. And my father at the time took me to a psychiatrist. And I talk about this in the book. The psychiatrist had really, really bad bedside manner. And within 3 minutes of me telling my story, he said, "You have bipolar disorder, take these 3 pills and come back in 2 weeks." And again, for me, I was in a doctoral program getting a PhD. It was impossible for me to have a mental health disorder. And so I outright rejected the diagnosis.
Mhm.
And, for the next close to a decade, I lived in denial that I had bipolar. It led to a wicked substance abuse addiction. And it wasn't until I was in rehab and kind of at that point in time felt I lost everything that mattered to me, that I said, you know what, I accepted that I had bipolar and, really started to turn my life around in terms of figuring out everything I could about the disease, understanding how to live a life with bipolar and that you can, it's not, a cancer sentence. It's, you just have to learn to adapt and adjust. And every person with bipolar or mental health, depression, anxiety, there are tools and techniques that a therapist will tell you or a psychiatrist will tell you, but everyone's different. And you got to think about your own values and your beliefs and your personality and your work ethic. There are so many other contextual factors that come into play. But knowing is half of it, and then applying it is the more important half. And so, for the last 10 years, I've been on this journey of really figuring out what that means for me. Um, where I'm at in my life now in my early 40s, I look at it as a gift rather than a curse. I have more energy than most people do early in the morning. It's where I usually write my books and do a lot of the innovative and creative stuff that bipolar people usually have more innovation around them. And so, yeah, but it was a journey. It's been a 20-year journey for me. And again, there were a number of factors like the psychiatrist not having bedside manner to my own ego when I was in my 20s. But now for what we do at my firm, it's not just about helping leaders grow and develop. It's really about helping leaders embrace their mental and emotional well-being. You see now with COVID and everything that's happened the last couple of years, mental health is much more important to employers, to employees. It's more talked about now. So the stigma is starting to be removed a little bit, not as much as it needs to yet. And you look at athletes like Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka, like they started to have the conversations about it within the public arena. A couple of years ago, Oprah and Prince Harry came out with a show called The Me You Don't See. It's on Netflix to it. And so again, where we are as a society, we're talking about it more now than when I was diagnosed 20 years ago. But I want to really push it through into the business world that it's okay to talk about mental health. Either you have something like that or somebody in your family does. And so you're removing the stigma that you're broken or you're damaged or you're weak if you have it is one of my passions and one of the passions of the people in my firm as well.
Interesting. So I have a little bit of experience with mental health disorders, my family being, seeing it and being close to it. But so much also I feel like is floating around sort of undiagnosed or not addressed. Yeah. And I think that includes, me at times as well.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for somebody who's having a hard time, maybe coming to grips with the fact that they need to get help? And you kind of alluded to it before, like everybody's different, but there are tools. Like what is having that experience? Like what is your piece of advice for somebody who's thinking they're maybe on the edge or needing help?
I would say the biggest thing is just to be honest with yourself. And if you know you're struggling or you see your habits or your lifestyle behaviors change, find a support system. Maybe it's a family member or a friend that you go to first just to get some ideas off of or just share how you're feeling. But I think therapy is whatever you make of it today. So therapy does not mean you have an issue or there's something wrong with you. It just means you want to get someone who's a thought partner to talk through what you're going through. And I've come to that realization, 20 years after I was diagnosed, because part of what I do at my firm, we do executive coaching, which I'll joke with clients, it's therapy for work people. And so, having an external thought partner that you can bounce ideas off of that maybe is not a spouse or a family member or a friend who knows you that deeply is going that step further to really kind of get a sense of who you are. That would be a big thing that I would say is, just find somebody you can talk to about it. And, you could do a life coach, you can do a therapist. There's a lot of different ways to kind of start that journey. But if you're feeling negative thoughts or you're feeling things that are persistent, going and doing that is a great first step.
And how have your experiences with mental health kind of informed your work on relationships and leadership now?
Yeah. I mean, again, so I say this to a lot of our clients. I learned more from a transgender woman in rehab about empathy and about compassion and about understanding how to navigate and persevere through challenges than I did in any of my doctoral classes on emotional intelligence or motivation. And so for me, my journey, the three big things that I think that I've learned that now transfer into my business is humility. I was an arrogant 25-year-old that thought the world revolved around him, and I was humbled. I don't take things for granted today. The second thing is around intentionality. So we just talked about, if you're feeling down or you're feeling negative, something's not right, to take some intentional action, be proactive to get some help that you need. And then I think the most important thing that feeds into what we'll talk about with relational intelligence is authenticity. I, like most of the folks that I had worked with, 20 years ago, wore masks. People have facades that they wear all the time, how they show up at work, how they show up with their friends. When you can take the mask off and be yourself and be authentic, it starts a process of helping you to transform your life.
Makes a lot of sense. So as I kind of mentioned before, and I want to get talking a little bit about your book, Relational Intelligence. This idea of building relationships, it seems to me to be one of these meta skills, right? That you can just take with you wherever. And it's so applicable all over the place. So, talking a lot with people about how to figure out what skills that they should build. Like a lot of people have problems because the world is our oyster and there's so much we could do with our time and attention. People come to me and they're trying to figure out what should they focus on to build to get to the next level or whatever. And I come back to these types of meta skills. And one is obviously relationship building and just thinking about network and how that opens the doors. So your book is called Relational Intelligence, right? Yes. Talk to us about what that actually means. What does that term mean?
Yeah. So we define relational intelligence as the ability to successfully connect with people and build strong, long-lasting relationships.
Okay. Connect and build long-lasting relationships. And there's really kind of like 5 essential sub-skills within relational intelligence that you talk about that you've identified as super important to being able to create long-lasting relationships. Okay. Let's go through them one by one. So start with the first one here.
Yeah. So the first skill is establishing rapport. And that's really the ability to use energy to create an initial positive connection with another person. And so you think about things like making a good first impression, drawing other people into the conversation, the choice of words that you use. We're big proponents here in my firm. It's not what you're trying to communicate to people, it's how you communicate it. Finding common ground with people. Simple things like eye contact, body language, nonverbal gestures. So the energy that you bring when you first meet someone can set a relationship out on a great foundation. I'm sure you've crossed people who you get in a room with them and their energy and their enthusiasm is contagious. And we've all come across people who, as soon as they walk in the room, they suck all the life out of the room. And so establishing rapport is really that first skill.
Yeah. And that's an interesting one as well. Like where you may get excited to meet somebody. I've had this with podcast guests before. I'm not going to name any names, but like, oh, I'm really excited to talk to that person. And then it's kind of a letdown because that first impression, their energy is just not there. It's not equal to the expectation, at least that I had in my head. So that's a really interesting one. Your expectation and the relationship between that and what actually occurs.
Yeah. The other piece that I would add, key word is energy. Right. You dictate how much energy you bring to a conversation, how much you don't. And so, most people go through life, everyone's heard building rapport, but it kind of is something they just do naturally, or they think they do. If you're intentional about how you use your energy, that can start a relationship off on a great foot.
And energy can cut 2 ways, right? I mean, I've been in rooms with people that are it seems like way too high energy, right? Is there a gauge? Is there a way that you coach people to get that sweet spot?
Yeah. So it goes into the second skill, understanding others. The second skill is about being intentional, about putting in the time and effort needed to get to know people on a deep level. So how does that relate to establishing rapport? One of the foundational factors for understanding other people is your emotional intelligence. So EQ does fall under relational intelligence, and it falls under this understanding others skill. you have to understand your emotions, Mike, the emotions of others, and how to manage emotions effectively. So if I walk into a room and I see the energy as a certain level, I'm not going to go 5, 6 decibels higher or 5, 6 decibels lower. A relationally intelligent person will be able to read the room, understand what is going on, and adapt and adjust their energy to meet the needs of those stakeholders. So that's a really key piece there.
How does someone that strikes me as a very difficult thing to figure out, especially if you are a really logical, smart, use your brain type person. Are there some, just general, is there like a general framework for trying to figure out and how to get better at that in particular?
Yeah, I mean, again, and a couple of the other skills that are under this second skill, active listening. Active listening is a huge thing. Most people like to talk versus actually listen. And so someone who comes in and wants to hear what other people are saying and doesn't need to share what they're doing, that's a really big piece. The other piece is being curious and inquisitive. Curious people usually connect with folks faster. And so asking a good question or asking a good follow-up question. A lot of the work that we do, we help companies hire senior executives, and they'll have us come in and work with the leader for 3 hours to get to know their journey and their story. And it's usually not the first question that we ask, but it's the question after the question that really enables us to get at who a person is and understand them. So if you have someone coming into a room, are you listening to what's going on? Are you picking up on what people are saying? And then are you engaging the conversation in a curious way?
I think one thing that helps, at least that I've helped coach people with, is this idea of like, there's the 5 whys, kind of like that root cause analysis. And if you just take that to a conversation and you're listening to somebody, like one way to practice this active listening, I feel like is to kind of keep thinking about, oh, why did somebody say that, and go a level deeper. And somebody, even if you do it once or twice, somebody feels heard. At least
that's right.
They're repeating. You're repeating back to them and going a level deeper on what they just said. And I think the idea of making someone feel heard is a really big one.
Yeah, it's huge, and that's the last part of understanding others is empathy. Can you put yourself in someone else's shoes? Most people genuinely, when you're talking to them, they're thinking of their response and what they're going to say back to you. They're not actively listening.
Right.
And so that's where some of the things we talked about were establishing rapport, leaning in, mirroring what the other person is doing, using your body language. Those things show that you're interested in what the person is saying, that you're actively listening. And then, like you said, asking the why questions. That'll help you to probe and kind of go deeper with that person.
Excellent. So number 3.
Yeah. 3 is embracing individual differences. And this is the ability to acknowledge, to be authentic in acknowledging and accepting that everyone comes from different backgrounds and experiences. So the key word here is authenticity. Authentic people show up in their natural way, and it kind of creates a psychological safety for others to be free to be themselves as well. And so, when we think about this and we do this in organizations, it's very similar connected to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So most companies now, especially after the events of 2020 and social justice, we have to get diverse people into our businesses. Embracing individual differences goes a step further because you're taking authenticity as a leader, you're bringing it to your people, and you're creating the conditions through which people can be themselves, and you create inclusivity through that means.
I was just having a conversation with somebody yesterday who was a former teammate of mine. And, she played this amazing role in her team of being the devil's advocate, right? Yeah. Like if you wanted to bring her a new project, she would comb through it with the critical eye, right? And ask the tough questions. And that is like a really unique value that is underappreciated in a lot of teams, because when you get in a big company and a corporate structure and the bureaucracy takes over, it's the natural sort of path of least resistance is to all become yes men and, cater to your boss and all that. And so that's one example, at least from my experience, that sticks out in this embracing individual differences. It's like that person serves a really critical role, actually. Yeah. And she's not a troublemaker, and she has a huge heart, and she wants the team and everybody to be the best. Yeah. But
thought-provoking questions. When we think about diversity in my firm, we think about diversity as thought. So how do you get to diversity as thought? You get people who are different, whether that's gender, age, race, sexual orientation. Get people on your team who are different. They're going to bring different ideas to the table. They're going to ask different thought-provoking questions like you talk about with your colleague, and that's going to get to better outcomes. What our research has shown, and kind of research more broadly in organizational psychology, diverse teams are more creative, they're more innovative, and they solve problems better.
And that makes a ton of sense when you think about it from like the statistical
Yeah.
aspects. But like this idea of psychological safety, being created within a team to then allow those differences to thrive and be additive,
Yeah.
is a tricky subject. It feels like. What have you come across in your research or your work around psychological safety? Like, I'm thinking specifically in terms of barriers to psychological safety, because I've experienced teams that just don't have this set up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think as the leader of the team, you being intentional about investing in the relationships that you have with every person on the team. So there's not a one size fit all. And if you're modeling and practicing those behaviors, and if you're being authentic, we're going to talk about trust in a moment. Vulnerability is a big part of that. But if you are showing up as yourself, and I'll give you a perfect example from my firm. It's a funny example, but it kind of will illustrate it for you. 3-4 years ago, I would have never shown a wall of 200 shoes behind me because I thought my clients would think I'm crazy or, but I'm a sneakerhead. I've been connecting sneakers for 20 years. And after meeting with my team, we were talking about our backgrounds and kind of things that help shape us. They were like, we know you have all the Jordans. Why don't you put it on the wall? Like that's part of your identity. That's part of your authenticity. And I will tell you, Mike, since I did that probably 2.5 years ago, it is the thing that clients will know about me more than anything that we do. I'm the shoe man to a lot of my clients. And so again, it was me just being vulnerable and saying, hey, this is part of my life and I'm going to be authentic with sharing it. And then that encouraged my teammates to, or my direct reports to do the same thing. So as a leader or as a team member, it's really just modeling those behaviors. And it's okay to be yourself and be comfortable in your own skin. Some of the best leaders that I coach, they understand that, they embrace that, and they encourage their people to do the same.
So for anybody that's listening to this on the podcast and not watching on YouTube, you are missing out because it is a sight to behold, the wall back here and the Jordans. And right before we started recording, Adam and I were talking about my kids and how my kids are they're wearing Jordans every day and they've never seen the guy actually play. It's just so amazing how that transcends. But run on over to YouTube and check it out because it's the wall is a fantastic sight to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Number 4, you just mentioned it. It's developing trust. So talk to us about that.
Yeah. Developing trust is the ability to be vulnerable and risk being exposed to the actions and behaviors of others. This is the most important skill in our relational intelligence framework. With it, you can unlock relationships to be really dynamic and transformative. Once it's broken, relationships end. And so there's a number of different factors to come into what we think when we think about developing trust. The first and foremost thing, Mike, is you have to know yourself. In the book, I call it the mirror test. You have to know what your values are, how you show up on your best days, what are your blind spots or derailers when you're stressed. If you don't understand those things about yourself as a leader, you're never going to be able to build trust with other people. If you do that, the big next step is what are the kind of ways that people develop trust, the underlying aspects of trust. And so our research has shown there's 5 components. We call them the 5 C's. The first is competence. Can I trust that you will do your job and do it well because you have the skills to do it? Commitment. Can I trust that you're going to honor the commitments that you make to me as a team member or to the organization? Consistency. Can I trust that you'll show up the same way each day, regardless of what's going on externally? Character. Can I trust that you have good ethics and high integrity? And courage. Can I trust that you'll say the things that need to be said rather than just what people might want to hear? So you talked about your colleague who would ask those provoking questions. She was, I wouldn't say devil's advocate, but she was having the courage to make people think differently than what they may have been thinking beforehand. And so these underlying aspects are how trust is built between people. What really differentiates leaders who are relationally intelligent and build great trust is they practice what we call intentional generosity. So relationally intelligent leaders intentionally invest in the relationships they have with their people. So it could be simple things like giving someone a piece of feedback, or it could be spending time to learn about their family or background or experiences. I use the farmer analogy in a lot of the talks we do with clients. It's continually sowing into your relationships so that people know that you value them, that you want to grow with them, that you want to develop them. And so for leaders who are intentionally generous, it creates a culture where people want to be the same way. And that ultimately gets to the outcome that I think everyone who builds trust is you want to have reciprocity.
Interesting. What you just talked about made me think of, the three skills before that all kind of go into building trust as well, just
Yeah.
because they're signals of trust.
Yeah.
And then this idea of intentional generosity. I'm wondering how you've seen this play out in this COVID times and this great the Great Recession and the quiet quitting and all of that kind of stuff. How do you see the interplay between those phenomenon and this idea of trustful leaders? Are they correlated? Is there what how do you see it?
Yeah, so let's take piece by piece. Let's look at COVID
Sure.
first. That was kind of the big thing at a global level. What we found early on is that most people were stressed about their life circumstances. For parents that had young children, they were now trying to figure out how they're going to do a work schedule with kids screaming in the background, or they're trying to homeschool. You had other folks who were dealing with elderly parents who they had to take care of. So work got very stressful. The leaders who developed trust the greatest with their people went out of their ways to check on their folks. Simple as jumping on a Zoom and just asking how things are going versus just coming into a meeting and talking about KPIs or talking about what needs to be accomplished from a performance standard. Then we look at going into the great resignation of the last year or so. People are not just leaving companies because of pay, title, and promotion. They're walking away from companies because they don't feel that connection, those human elements of connection with their leaders and with their managers. They don't get a sense of mission and purpose. The company may have a mission, but how is the work that they're doing tied into what they're trying to drive towards? And then also, they were leaving companies and they still are because they're not getting developed. They're not getting people to kind of help them build their capabilities, whether it's career tracking or other types of things like that. And so the leaders that have developed trust that we've worked with over the last year or two, they've taken time to help people develop and grow. That's the big piece that separates leaders who are maybe just trying to drive outcomes and those who are looking to build teams over time. And so those that develop trust, they really take the time to make sure that folks are doing well, but then they also invest in helping them develop and grow.
Interesting. Very cool. Moving on to number 5, cultivating influence. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so this is the most powerful piece in the framework. So if trust is the most important, once trust is established, you can now cultivate influence with people, which is the ability to have a positive and meaningful impact on the lives of others. So a lot of times, historically, traditionally, leaders think of influence as controlling the actions or behaviors of others or getting people to accomplish my goals. When we talk about trust, we're not talking about that. We're talking about, are you helping your people become the best versions of themselves? And so some of the great leaders, you think about the idea of servant leadership. Servant leaders want to have all tides rise, not just their goals or their priorities. And so leaders who cultivate influence, they actively mentor their people. They coach their people. They provide consistent developmental feedback. They look for opportunities to help people take on more scope and responsibilities. They don't manipulate. They don't control people. They don't try to have top-down authority. It's really about bringing the best out of those around them.
Okay, very, very good. Now, we kind of just went through the big points of the book in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
What's somebody going to get from grabbing the book and reading it that they didn't just get out of this conversation?
I think if they pick up the book, the 2 big things I'd want them to walk away with, this is a blueprint or a playbook for how you can build relationships across all areas of your life.
Right.
First part of the book, there's a chapter on each of these 5 skills we've talked about. The second part of the book is the applications of relational intelligence. So how does it apply to your family relationships? How does it apply to your friendships? How does it apply to what you're doing in terms of building networks and in the business world? And then how does it apply to romantic relationships and marriage? If you look at the dating world, we just did an article, released it on our website around why every man needs to know relational intelligence. You look at establishing rapport and understanding others. What are you doing on a first date? Are you making eye contact? Are you looking to find common ground with the person you're going on a date with? Are you talking less and listening more? So these skills apply to all walks of life. So that'd be the first takeaway. And then the second takeaway I would say is if people are intentional and authentic in any of their relationships, those relationships will become stronger quicker than if they're not.
Excellent. So thinking about these 5 skills, I obviously cut across great leaders. You have to have these 5 skills, but then you think about how different people's styles are, right? of leadership. And I'm thinking about Michael Jordan, who we've talked about a little bit, and Gandhi, right? Like completely different people.
Yeah.
How do we reconcile style versus the actual skills that people have that are great leaders?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Mike. So when we talk about relational intelligence, this is not a personality trait or a characteristic. These are skills that you can learn, practice, and put into play. Everyone is going to do it differently based on how they're wired, based on their values. You've seen on sports recently, there was with the Golden State Warriors, how Draymond Green punched one of his teammates.
Right.
They were talking about how Jordan punched Steve Kerr like 10 or 15 years
Right.
ago. His leadership style was very different than someone who was more collaborative or, more engaging. And so your listeners, if they're leaders, if they're early in their careers, you're wired a certain way. The key is for you to work with a coach or do some self-discovery, figure out how you're wired. And then you're going to practice these skills in different ways. The way Mike establishes rapport and builds rapport is going to be different than Adam. The skills, the same thing. We each want to be able to use our energy to connect with other people. But if you're more extroverted, you're more introverted. If someone is more agreeable versus someone more closed-minded, all those factors in your personality will come into play. So the other big piece is kind of doing that work on yourself to really understand how you're wired and what makes you tick.
And I assume it's also part of who you're leading too and how they're wired, right? Because obviously punching someone in the office setting is probably not going to work as well as on the 90s Bulls when you're winning all these championships.
Yep, absolutely. But I think I believe servant leaders are probably the best leaders in terms of what they're able to do for their organizations and for their people. And so a great servant leader not only has relational intelligence, but they're students of their people. So they learn about folks. They don't have a one size fit all. So the way that I interact with you may be different than the way that I interact with Judy or with Jennifer or whoever else is on the team. But a leader will take time to build those individual relationships.
What's the best example or your favorite example of a servant leader that maybe you've learned the most from or think exemplifies that ideal?
Yeah, I mean, that's really, really good. So I do a lot of work with nonprofits. I don't know if you've heard of Craig Groeschel. He runs a church called Life Church.
Okay, no.
Does a lot of work around leadership too. And he has a conference they do every year, I think in Chicago. But he's built a church that is a multi-site church across the US. And he's really built it on being a servant leader for his people and his employees. And for him, what that means is helping them become the best versions of themselves, but having it aligned around collective goals. And so a lot of the team members that he works with and the work that they've done has been built around relationships and built around collective outcomes. So he's an example that I think, have been inspirational to me in my journey.
Okay, excellent. I got a couple more questions in our rapid close, which I hope you're prepared for. But I want to give you an opportunity before the rapid close to just sort of have the floor. If there's anything I missed as a terrible host that I should have asked you, or if there's any parting message that you want to convey to the audience, I'm just going to give you the floor.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people might say, why relational intelligence now? Like, why is it important? And I think there's really a couple different reasons. I think first, coming out of the pandemic, we were socially isolated for 2 years. And so people lost that art of human connection, human face-to-face connection. And so, as I mentioned, this is a blueprint to help you reestablish that. You look at some of the social justice events of 2020, really diverse organizations are not just about getting certain people in chairs. It's about inclusivity. It's about being authentic. And so this book helps unlock that. And then if you're leading any type of people and you want to avoid what's going on with the great resignation and losing talent, investing in your people, helping them develop and grow, cultivating influence, that is the way to do it. And so this book will also help you there in terms of how you can mentor, how you can coach, or how you can be intentional around giving feedback to your people.
And I'm just going to riff off of that. I love what you said. I'm just going to riff for a second on the idea that like the world is changing rapidly. And there's a baseline level of uncertainty, and a lot of people may be experiencing heightened uncertainty at the moment. And the idea of being able to build relationships quickly and leveraging a network is a resilient skill. It keeps you resilient to change. It helps you figure out the next step and learn more rapidly. So I think everybody, like, as I said, I'm a big fan of saying Metascope. it is a meta skill, and everyone can get better at building relationships for whatever purpose that you want. So I'll just close with that.
Yeah.
All right, rapid questions, and then I'm going to wrap up by asking where people can find out more about you. All right, is there a recent author, thought leader, influencer, or other that you've recently come across that has caught your attention?
So I wouldn't know. I mean, we're going to go to sports again. I wouldn't know if it's a recent person, but someone that I admire a lot is Steph Curry, especially what he's been able to do the last year in terms of, really being alone and getting the championship for Golden State. His leadership style, his approach, the way he looks at teams, that's been very inspirational in terms of the work that we do.
Okay. What book are you reading right now or have read very recently that has influenced you the most?
Yeah. So I'm reading right now a book called Servant Leadership in Action. It's a grouping or a large kind of conglomerate of different authors, Ken Blanchard, Brene Brown, Marshall Goldsmith, Patrick Lencioni, Stephen Covey, John Maxwell. They all have small little chapters, about 5 to 6 pages, with subjects like the characteristics of a servant leader, how to identify your purpose, the importance of developing trust, how to spot ideal team players. So it's a quick guide you can go to quickly if you got 10 minutes and read a quick chapter. And that's been kind of helpful for me as I think about relational intelligence and how it applies in different settings.
Great. Do you have one piece of advice for someone that's just starting out or trying to get a foothold in this world?
Yeah. I mean, I think relationships are everything in all walks of life. And so if you want to transform your life or those of the lives around you, being intentional, being authentic, being vulnerable are the key underlying factors that can unlock powerful, dynamic, life-changing relationships for you or anyone that you care about.
All right. And what's got you excited about the next 12 months? We need some positivity.
Yes, really exciting stuff. So relational intelligence is not just a book for me. It's the way that we do work at my leadership advisory firm. And so over the next 12 months, we have a series of things that we're going to be doing to kind of bring relational intelligence to the business world. The first thing is we are releasing our relational intelligence test in January. So I'm sure you've taken the Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram or some of those things. You'll be able to pick up the book and read an idea about these 5 skills. And then you'll be able to go to our website and take the actual assessment to know what your relational intelligence is. So that's one thing we're excited about. Second thing is we do a lot of training and development at my firm. And so we have our flagship program that we've built and launched this year called the Relational Intelligence Experience, which for CEOs and senior executives, it's a 2-day immersive. We bring a team together, they learn about the 5 skills, but then they get to practice them with each other in the room. So they're taking these things back to their offices. And then the other pieces, going back to the organizational psychology roots, we're doing a roadshow next year at a number of conferences, the Society of Business Psychologists, the American Psychological Association, Society of Human Resource Management, to talk about relational intelligence. But the way that we're doing it is we're bringing clients that we work with into some of these talks with us. So they're not just going to hear about the theory that we came up with. They're going to hear about how it actually is practical and applicable in the work that some of our clients do.
Well, that's a lot. You got 12 months of growth ahead of you. It's fantastic. Will you try to let me know when that test is available? Because
it'll be live January 1st. It'll be live.
Oh, okay. All right. Excellent. Because I am working on what I call an advantage map. And it's a way for people to map out what their true advantages are, today as they stand, so that they can figure out and plan their growth path or use those advantages in different ways. Well, obviously, one of them is about knowing yourself. And I think this idea of understanding your own relational intelligence can probably be applicable in that. And I can send people to that test. So I'm interested in that. Adam, where can people find out more about you online and the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So we just launched our brand new website. That's Bandelli Associates.com. You'll find out information there about the book, about the 2-day training I just spoke about, as well as the test. Your followers can follow me on Instagram at Adam Bandelli. Same thing for LinkedIn or Twitter. And then we also have our YouTube channel where we put out different types of leadership information, tools, tips, techniques to really grow as a leader.
Excellent. We'll make sure we have links to all that in the show notes that'll go out in our newsletter and on our website.
Awesome.
Dr. Adam Bandelli, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation. And I really will enjoy following your progress and seeing all the good work that you put out into the world.
Yeah, Mike, this has been great. Really appreciate you taking the time today.
All right. Thanks so much.